Before the Fellowship was the greatest story you've never heard. I'm Greg.
I'm Cameron.
And I'm Dan.
Join us as we read and react to the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Last time we read about the Spring of Arda and how Melkor in his spite ravaged the new creation. Today we continue chapter 1 of Quenta Silmarillion. Behind the walls of the Pelori, the Valar established their domain in that region, which is called Valinor, and there were their houses, their gardens, and their towers. In that guarded land, the Valar gathered great store of light and all the fairest things that were saved from the ruin, and many others yet fairer they made anew, and Valinor became more beautiful even than Middle-earth in the spring of Arda, and it was blessed, for the deathless dwelt there, and there not faded nor withered, neither was there any stain upon flower or leaf in that land, nor any corruption or sickness in anything that lived, for the very stones and waters were hallowed. And when Valinor was full wrought, and the mansions of the Valar were established, in the midst of the plain beyond the mountains they built their city, Valmar of many bells. Before its western gate there was a green mound, a Zelohar, that is named also Corolare. And Yavanna hallowed it, and she sat there long upon the green grass, and sang a song of power, in which was set all her thought of things that grow in the earth. But Nienna thought in silence, and watered the mold with tears. In that time the Valar were gathered together to hear the song of Yavanna, and they sat silent upon their thrones of council in the Mahanaxar, the ring of doom, near to the golden gates of Valmar. And Yavanna Kementari sang before them, and they watched. And as they watched, upon the mound there came forth two slender shoots, and silence was over all the world in that hour, nor was there any other sound save the chanting of Yavanna. Under her song the saplings grew and became fair and tall, and came to flower, and thus there awoke in the world the two trees of Valinor. Of all things which Yavanna made, they have most renown, and about their fate all the tales of the elder days are woven. The one had leaves of dark green, that beneath were as shining silver, and from each of his countless flowers a dew of silver light was ever falling, and the earth beneath was dappled with the shadow of his fluttering leaves. The other bore leaves of a young green, like the new opened beech. Their edges were of glittering gold. Flowers swung upon her branches in clusters of yellow flame, formed each to a glowing horn that spilled a golden rain upon the ground. And from the blossom of that tree there came forth warmth and a great light. Telperion, the one was called in Valinor, and Silpion, and Ninquilote, and many other names. But Laurelin was the other was, and Malinara, and Kulurian, and many names in song beside. In 7 hours the glory of each tree waxed to full, and waned again to naught, and each awoke once more to life an hour before the other ceased to shine. Thus in Valinor twice every day there came a gentle hour of softer light, when both trees were faint, and their gold and silver beams were mingled. Telperion was the elder of the trees, and came first to full stature and to bloom, and that first hour in which he shone, the white glimmer of a silver dawn, the Valar reckoned not into the tale of hours, but named it the opening hour, and counted from it the ages of their reign in Valinor. Therefore at the 6th hour of the first day, and of all the joyful days thereafter, until the darkening of Valinor, Telperion ceased his time of flower, and at the 12th hour Laurelin her blossoming. And each day of the Valar in Aman contained 12 hours, and ended with the second mingling of the lights, in which Laurelin was waning, but Telperion was waxing. But the light that was spilled from the trees endured long, ere it was taken up into the airs or sank down into the earth. And the dews of Telperion and the rain that fell from Laurelin Varda hoarded in great vats like shining lakes, that were to all the land of the Valar as wells of water and of light. Thus began the days of the bliss of Valinor, and thus began also the count of time. But as the ages drew on to the hour appointed by Iluvatar for the coming of the firstborn, Middle-earth lay in a twilight beneath the stars that Varda had wrought in the ages, forgotten of her labors in Ea. And in the darkness Melkor dwelt, and still often walked abroad, in many shapes of power and fear. And he wielded cold and fire, from the tops of the mountains to the deep furnaces that are beneath them. And whatsoever was cruel or violent or deadly in those days is laid to his charge. From the beauty and bliss of Valinor, the Valar came seldom over the mountains to Middle-earth, but gave to the land beyond the Pelori their care and their love. And in the midst of the blessed realm were the mansions of Aule, and there he labored long. For in the making of all things in that land he had the chief part, and he wrought there many beautiful and shapely works, both openly and in secret. Of him comes the lore and knowledge of the earth, and of things, all things that it contains, whether the lore of those that make not, but seek only for the understanding of what is, or the lore of a craftsman, the weaver, the shaper of wood, and the worker in metals, and the tiller and husbandman also, though these last and all that deal with things that grow and bear fruit must also look to the spouse of Aule, Yavanna Kementari. Aule it is who is named the friend of the Noldor, for of him they learned much in after days, and they are the most skilled of the elves, and in their own fashion, according to the gifts which Iluvatar gave to them, they added much to his teaching, delighting to tongues and in scripts, and in the figures of broidery, of drawing, and of carving. The Noldor also it was who first achieved the making of gems, and the fairest of all gems were the Silmarills, and they were lost. But Manwe Sulimo, highest and holiest of the Valar, sat upon the borders of Aman, forsaking not in his thought the outer lands, for his throne was set in majesty upon the pinnacle of Taniquetil, the highest of the mountains of the world, standing upon the margin of the sea. Spirits in the shape of hawks and eagles flew ever to and from his halls, and their eyes could see to the depths of the seas, and pierce the hidden caverns beneath the world. Thus they brought word to him of well nigh all that passed in Arda, yet some things were hidden, even from the eyes of Manwe, and the servants of Manwe, for where Melkor sat in his dark thought, impenetrable shadows lay.
Wowee.
All right.
There's lots of...
It might be important to talk about what the landscape kind of looks like, because I'm trying to wrap my head around it too. It seems like the Valar, so they came to Arda and started creating stuff, and then Melkor like started destroying stuff using fire and ice, and then he eventually dug his great fortress. This was last time we read, to hide from the Valar. And then in the destruction now, we're talking about the Valar rebuilding, and they erect these mountains.
Mountains, yeah.
The walls of the Pelori. and then which kind of keeps their kingdom safe, and they're like collecting the beauty and the light and the good things into their kingdom.
Wait, the mountains are?
No, the Valar.
Mountains are keeping the bad out, right?
Yeah, it seems like before
Melkor.
they were just creating good things everywhere, and now after the destruction of Melkor and him building his fortress underground, they started to bring the beautiful stuff into their kingdom.
Nice.
Yeah, so I think we're still pretty far from Middle Earth looking like it is, as we're familiar in the Lord of the Rings series.
I love that it says, though, that Valinor, what they built, or the place, like, it became more beautiful than Middle Earth in the spring of Arda. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you were saying this is not even close to what Middle Earth looks like yet.
But this, I believe Valinor persists through all of it, as I recall. So it is kind of the kingdom of the Valar and the Valir, and it's off separated in some way across the ocean, and
eventually it becomes separated. So instead of just a mountain, what's that?
Is it the west?
Yes.
And it was blessed, for the deathless dwelt there. And there naught faded nor withered, neither was there any stain upon flower or leaf in the land, or any corruption or sickness or in anything that lived, for the very stones and waters were hallowed. So is this the west that the elves take their great trip to in?
Yeah, so that's how I was getting at, was I think so the history we're reading about, and the landscape is going to change after an upcoming battle. But right now it's mountains separating them from Middle Earth, but eventually the landscape is even more destroyed and divided, so that the Valinor or the Valar would need to travel a longer distance to reach Middle Earth, I think. And then the history we're reading about actually becomes the mythology of the elves, sailing into the west, into the Undying Lands.
So to put it into perspective, to make it more relatable, so Valinor's like America. The Atlantic Ocean is like the Peloria Mountains, right?
Yeah, and then Morgoth is the
of Europe,
the monarchy.
You've changed, Dan.
Yeah.
What? I have a Texan accent now, don't I? No?
Also, we learn about the trees, the two trees.
Yes, the trees. That's what I was about to bring up too. I was talking to Cameron before we started recording. There's so many names, and it's really it's not that important that you remember each of the names. They give 3 names for each of the 2 trees,
which already have a name in of themselves. They're the 2 trees of the of Valinor. Like, they don't need any other names.
Right. So
maybe the other names were Guy K's idea.
Guy.
Don't forget Guy K.
And he's like, okay, I'll put your names in there too.
Yeah. I love that about it, though. It's this lived-in world with multiple languages and understandings of these important ideas. But I don't, as far as I recall, you don't really even need to remember their names necessarily. Just that there are 2 trees, and that light and warmth come from them.
I love how they wax and wane. It's almost like a whole season, but in a day. Mm-hmm. Like they glow and then they fade, and
it's tidal.
They overlap a little bit.
It's tidal. Like, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Tidal. Yes.
Yeah. What did you think I said?
Title.
Well, I'm British, so I would have said title.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Or
unless you were making fun of me. I don't know.
Title.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me, I probably need to reread this again, but their light overlaps at certain hours, right? And it kind of reminds me of Tatooine or something with the 2 suns, and just there's a certain like splendor in that we can't really know in our experience of Earth, but these 2 kind of distinct lights overlapping and creating just this like beautiful time in each day.
Am I tripping? But isn't there two suns in this world as well? Aren't there two great lights? Did we read that?
Well, we read that there were two lamps that were created, but Melkor spilled them and broke them.
Oh yeah,
poured flame over
naughty
the
boy.
Earth. Yeah. So those are gone forever.
What?
Okay, so this is getting very sidetracked and meta, but in The Silver Chair, the book by C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis, yeah.
Most underrated Chronicle of Narnia.
That's my favorite.
It's a good one.
Yeah. So they have this lamp that lights, this lamp that hangs on the ceilings of the cavern, and they light the inside of the cavern. And then they talk about the sun as this mythological thing because it hangs in the sky mysteriously. I wonder who had the idea first, Tolkien or Lewis, to have these lamps that give light as a part of your cosmos.
I think it's neither. I think it has its roots in the mythology.
Ancient mythologies.
The mythologies they studied. I don't know if it's directly Norse mythology, which they were both like really obsessed with. And I'm sure that a viewer out there would be able to tell us if that is true or not. But I bet they were competing to a certain degree where they were like, how dare you include like the great lamps? Like,
well,
but it's not an original idea
first, right? And they read it aloud to each other. So I'm wondering who did it first.
Right, they read it aloud to each other, but they were writing it like, I think simultaneously. I think they were both writing at the same time, and coming up with the ideas, and they both hated each other's ideas, but loved each other somehow, which is like just never happens in this day and age. But
I hear of cynicism that Tolkien had for allegory and what C.S. Lewis was writing, but did it go the other direction as well?
I think it did go both ways to some degree. I mean, because they would just drink together, right? They'd meet up at a pub, and share their works together and critique each other. So, and they were professors. They were literally critics for a living. So he must have received it from Lewis. I know that Tolkien's criticism of Lewis was a lot harsher. Anyway.
Yeah, I feel I've read that maybe in a preface to The Lord of the Rings or something, but I never read anything that C.S. Lewis had to say about The Lord of the Rings or any critiques he had. Interesting.
Yeah, I think I was able to speak with Walter Hooper once about that, and I believe he said that there was bantering back and forth.
Walter Hooper's the editor?
Yeah, he was the head of the literary estate for C.S. Lewis. Unfortunately, he died a couple of years ago. But he has written multiple things on Lewis since his death, and I'm pretty sure that it might be detailed in one of his biographies as well. I'll have to look it up. I'll look it up later. Anyway, the one thing. Okay, so I have questions for you guys because I know you guys will be able to answer these probably.
Greg,
so like we have this like
this.
rain that is coming down, right? And the trees are blossoming, and one of the trees had ceased its time of flower, but it says that the rain that fell from Silmarillion, Vada, hoarded in great vats like shining lakes that were to all the land of the Valar, as well as wells of water and of light. What is this? Does it ever show up again in any of the histories of Arda or the Lord of the Rings?
Light water?
Well, it's something that I don't know. I'm not particularly sure about this moment that you're referring to, but it seems like on my first reading, I remember there was a moment where it said, and now there was light in the world. And it's like, oh, there wasn't light in the world before all this. There was tons of stuff happening, that kind of thing. Yeah. But even if that's not the case here, just that they have these sources in their land of water and light. It's because there aren't suns or a sun at this point.
Right.
This is the light.
The
this
two
is
trees are the
there
light.
were the lamps before, and now there are trees that produce light. It's very interesting. So you just kind of have to sit in this weird muddle of, I don't know what the things really look like right now, and things just continue to develop, and it becomes clear.
Well, for me, it instantly made me think of the vial of light that is given to Frodo from Galadriel, right? So I was wondering,
keep a tab on that. We'll have to keep a bookmark there. And
I know it isn't the same because I just looked it up. Eärendil is the
Blood of Eärendil.
Yeah, an exile of Gondolin, who was a sailor apparently, and so it was a star, right? It was the light that guided, I guess, this sailor.
We'll get there when we get there.
Okay, they show up in this book. Cool.
Let's we'll let that.
I don't know this. Okay, so I am the viewer. Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen next. Even though I've read further than this, I just don't remember any of it. Okay, so the other question I had for you guys, because you guys are the experts to me, is that okay, so the Noldor are elves, right? We hear about them as being the most intelligent or something, most skilled of the elves, which is what it says in this chapter. And in their own fashion, according to the gifts which Iluvatar gave them, they added much to his teaching. So they create the Silmarills, which it's the first time we hear about them, right?
Right.
We haven't heard about them before.
Yep, that's right.
So this is
but this is anachronistic.
We don't know there's no context.
Right.
Fairest of all the gems.
This hasn't happened yet, though. It's saying that it happens, but we haven't heard anything else. It's just kind of.
It's like how you have multiple creation stories in the Bible. Like it kind of goes back and explains a different angle of it.
But one thing that you brought up that is pretty interesting, he taught them things, but they were able to add further onto that and do things that even he himself hadn't done, apparently.
Ooh,
it says creating gems, right? Like they first achieved the making of gems by developing what they had learned from him.
Yes. That's so cool. What does that remind you? There's something in scripture that reminds me of. Does it remind you?
It reminds me of me, because I'm a gem.
Oh yeah, you are a gem.
It reminds me of St. Paul. Do you know which verse I'm thinking of?
No. Oh yeah. Greater things than these you also will do.
Okay, it wasn't that verse, but
I was thinking of that too, Cameron. That's what.
Okay, no, but that verse fits as well. I was thinking of the verse where Paul says that I make up for the sufferings that are lacking in Christ. Christ's greatest work, right, in the Christian faith is that he died and conquered death in his death. That's the great paradox. By dying, he destroyed death. That doesn't make any sense. But somehow, because he was, God himself, he destroys death. And so that's it. It's done. There's no more need to be done because God has won. But no, St. Paul says that I make up for the sufferings that were lacking in Christ. And that is the work that God gives to his people, right? In the Christian faith, which is where we're coming from. As Catholics, we believe that. But in this story, it's they're given a part of Iluvatar that he chose not to do. He didn't need to do it this way, but he chose to do it this way by saying, I'm not going to do those things. I will give it to you. You can complete my teaching. You can show this part of me that hasn't been seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Or was it saying that the Noldor achieved things that Aule did not teach them? Oh,
is it Aule, not Iluvatar?
I'm trying to find that.
I think that's specifically what it's referring to, but Iluvatar is who gave Aule his particular vision.
Yeah, I think that's similar.
Oh yeah, because it says yeah. Okay, yeah.
Oh, similar sounds similar to Silmaril. So there's a pun waiting to be mined out of that. I'll come up with it later. But anyways, you mentioned the Noldor. I was just looking in the encyclopedia because I remember that Noldor is a particular clan or a division of the elves. So this is like jumping ahead. What we just read, the last part of it jumps ahead to what happens after the elves come and kind of split off. And
The Sundering.
yeah, we don't need to get into that, but the Noldor are one of the elves who it says are the greatest craftsmen of the elves. So that's what it's getting at. Because
those with knowledge, they have a knowledge that
a crafting knowledge.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Crafty.
Which is crazy because there is a kind of, you would think Aule would be the one because he's the smith, right? But somehow they were able to complete things that even he wasn't able to do. That's pretty cool.
That is cool. Yeah.
I think there's like a little account of something like this coming up that I'm really excited to hear. So I'll bring that up again once we read it. But
it's interesting to me. Will Aule get jealous of them? I don't know if this is going to happen, and maybe it's just a non sequitur for him. Like it's like that. Well, that doesn't follow because it all give glory to.
Yeah, that's kind of my reading of it. Without
don't no spoilers. No,
I'm just saying from what we've read here. I mean, it doesn't say anything. I'm just reading, between the lines, I suppose. And what I'm assuming might not be true, but it seems that he is a friend to them. So I would think he kind of delights in the fact that they're taking what he's taught them and developing it further. He's certainly more powerful than them, so he could do these things. I don't know.
Spoiler alert, but Morgoth joins a punk band later on. with
I believe it.
With Mandos. Makes sense. They're both goths.
Well, that part doesn't really make sense.
Okay,
but,
my bad.
Well, no, I mean there could be some sort of gothic kind of.
I was too cool in high school to know the different categories.
Well, I think of Green Day, right? And they're punk. Right? Who's it? What's the lead singer?
Yeah,
Billy. What's his name?
Greg, you know
it. Greg, you know it.
Billy Joe
Armstrong. Yeah. Billy Joe Armstrong, and he definitely went for a time of looking like a goth.
Yeah,
so Cameron, you're vindicated there, but he's not strictly goth. Is its own. It's different. Goths. Okay, but Morgoth like Green Day.
Morgoth is a goth. You would agree if we're classifying the Valar.
I think he's more goth than any goth that has ever existed.
He's the goth.
All right. Well, if you like what you hear, go ahead and rate us 3 Silmarills out of 3. Follow us everywhere at Before the Fellowship and send any comments or questions to beforethefellowship@gmail.com. Join us next time as we read the greatest story you've never heard, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien.